Welcome, everyone, and thanks for being with me this next hour. You are listening to Everyday Astrology with C.A. Brooks on Transcendental Tuesdays, and currently we are broadcasting on 12radio.com and simulcasting on my YouTube channel that has the same name as the show, Everyday Astrology with C.A. Brooks. But heads up, we are going to change the role of 12radio.com. It is still going to be available, but we're not going to be broadcasting live, at least within I don't know, maybe 8 weeks. We're going to change the nature of it. It's going to be there. It's going to have, links to all of our shows and that sort of thing, but it's going to have a different look and a different purpose. So if you don't already catch us on YouTube, you might want to kind of figure that out, how you can go over there and listen. But like I said, the links are going to be on 12 Radio, so no worries. But just to give you a heads up that things are changing a little bit. That's how life is, right? So this is June 16th. 2026. And on today's show, we are going to talk about the asteroid Chiron because it changes signs this week on Friday, June 19th. It's going to leave Aries and it's going to go into Taurus. Now, there's other things going on, and I really like to talk about the week ahead. And there's big stuff going on, like the summer solstice. The sun enters Cancer on Sunday, 6/21. So happy birthday to all the Cancer babies out there. And also, one other thing I had said 2 weeks ago, I believe, somebody had asked about Mercury and Cancer. That's what we were talking about on the show. And they wanted to know about Mercury and Cancer through the houses. And I said, sure, we'll do that in a couple of weeks. And I still do want to do that. I think we're going to postpone that until Mercury actually retrogrades. And it retrogrades, I believe, on the 29th of the month. So somewhere in there, we're going to fit it in. However, I think part of that question or that request was really about talking about the houses in the chart, which is a really valuable thing to do. And hopefully we are going to get in a little bit of that today with Chiron. In fact, I've got a whole slew of stuff I want to talk about, and I keep looking at these notes going, can you really get through all this stuff? So I'm going to do my best. And hopefully part of that will be you're looking at where Chiron in Taurus sits in your chart and starting to get some ideas about that. So if you want to kind of expand that and go, oh, but if Mercury retrograde is sitting in this other house, eventually, maybe that'll answer some of the questions that you wanted. But I haven't forgotten that request. And speaking of, if you would like to join me, I'd love to see you over on YouTube. And Leslie is there. Hey, Leslie, it's good to see you, and Quelly and James. Everybody, thank you for being there, and I will try to keep an eye on it if you have some specific questions about Chiron. Like I said, I can feel it already. I'm probably going to be talking, really fast, trying to get in a lot of information. But hopefully, I really will cover the highlights and get use something that you go, ooh, that kind of sticks with me, because that's what's really important in the midst of everything. Can you hang on to something that just always brings you back to what you need to know? And of course, go over to Mark's Power Peak, the online newsletter, because in that Power Peak, which comes out every Saturday night, it's a digital, newsletter, and you can subscribe for free. How many things can you do that with anymore? Go ahead and subscribe to that, and then it'll come to your email box every Saturday night. And in there's a lot of articles, but one that I would direct you to is mine, which is the week ahead. And it's going to tell you a lot of stuff about that sun in Cancer, about the solstice, and about Venus. She's up to some stuff in the beginning of the week, some stuff going on there. So you're probably going to want to know about that, especially because she's going to be in a good relationship with Neptune, and that's going to happen tonight. So a lot of people are going to be interested in that, both for romance and maybe for money situations or possibly for creativity. So lots of good stuff going on, and you will find that in my column in the week ahead. If you look not only in the introduction, but in the dailies, it'll tell you what's going on every single day. All right, so let's move on. So, of course, we are talking about, we're, just anchor ourselves. We're in the week of June 15th. And so we're going to kind of jump to Friday because that's going to be when Chiron enters Taurus. But first, I'm going to give you kind of a little background on Chiron. And here again, if you have questions, you can go ahead and put those over in the chat room, and I'll try to take a few moments and check that out and see, make sure I'm just not losing you. But one of the first things is, this is a big deal because Chiron has been in its current transit in Aries for 7 years. It's been there since February of 2019. So in the scope of things, when something's been sitting in an energy for a very long time and then makes a move, usually we feel it somewhere. We feel it somewhere in our lives, or we go, "Oh, this is going on." Now, maybe it's personal, maybe it's more communal, going, "Oh, what's going to happen? How are these things happening?" But in any case, as we look at this, it's not a planet. It is an asteroid. And it's one of literally thousands of these star-like objects that are orbiting somewhere in our cosmos. Now, a lot of times the asteroids are really between Mars and Jupiter, but as you'll see, like with Chiron, it's kind of out there near Saturn, and it kind of goes all over the place. It's got it's got a very unusual orbit. So there again, though, going back to some basic questions like, why do we care about the, asteroids? And I think that's a really good question, because when you think about astrology, Western or Vedic or however, think about it. We start with those 10 planets and we give them all psychological meanings. We give them a role in this script. And then we add the sun and the moon. And then we add the influence of the north and south nodes of the moon. At least most people do. Remember, those aren't planets either. Those are mathematical calculations that are involving the intersection of the Earth's orbit with the sun with the moon's orbit around Earth. So there again, I don't even try to figure that out. That's what the books are for, right? You look it up. But we usually do put a meaning or an interpretation onto the north and south nodes. Now, we've already got a lot of stuff in there, right? And considering we not only have those planets in signs, we also interpret them according to where they are in the chart. Because we divide that chart, or the sky, that picture of the sky, into 12 different sections that we call the houses that are ruled by those signs. We're literally taking a picture of the sky. We're putting the constellations up there and then going, okay, there's Aries, there's Gemini, there's Cancer and Scorpio. That's what we're doing. And then, for good measure, we're also looking at those planets as having relationships with other planets, or maybe with the house cusps, or maybe with those nodes of the moon. So, quite frankly, if you're looking at this, you're going, oh my God, how many puzzle pieces are there? And isn't that enough? Why do we need to introduce those asteroids? And I would say, yeah, that's really right. And in fact, the other thing maybe I just want to say here is, I think astrology is incredibly simple and incredibly complex at the same time. But, when you're overwhelmed, you just take a step back. But the wonderful thing is everything's related. Like, for instance, Mars is a planet. It's associated with the first house. It's associated with Aries. And that's the way every single thing is. So these things are all like, I don't want to call them cousins exactly, but they're all related. So if you know something about Mars, then you probably know something about Aries and something about the purpose of the first house in the chart. So in some ways, once those pieces start coming together, it doesn't feel so complicated. But once again, and I know I felt the same way when I first started looking at Chiron. Do I really need one more piece of this puzzle? Do I need to add another, complicated piece? But I would offer this. And, there again, it's a decision you have to make for yourself. Because, in fact, that's the other thing. Somebody recently asked me, do you look at this? Do you look at Vesta? Do you look at this asteroid? Do you look at this one over here? And trying to explain why I don't. It only comes down to, and I say, I don't yet. And the reason is because I think it's already very rich, and I don't feel like I need those additional asteroids. However, the other thing is I have looked at them, not in the same depth that I've looked at Chiron, But I've looked at them, and even though they were intriguing, they were interesting, I didn't find the information on them compelling enough that I wanted to go in and say, oh, I want to see that in everybody's chart. Or I even want to see it in my chart. And there again, that's kind of where you start. You go, hey, look at this asteroid in my chart. Look at the interpretation. Is it speaking to me? And it may speak to me in 5 years. It may speak to me tomorrow. But for right now, the only one that really grabbed my attention is Chiron. And so that's the one I always do look at in somebody's chart. Now, here's a statement by Douglas Block and Demetra George. They're the authors of Astrology for Yourself, which I think is an incredible book, for anybody. I use it as a reference, but it's a great beginning astrology book as well, just telling you how to put the pieces together. And this is what they say, which is very succinct. Asteroids provide a depth and fine tuning that is simply not available through using the traditional 10 planets. Now, I'm not sure I'd say it exactly that way, because like I said, I think, oftentimes you look at a few things in an astrology chart and you've got a pretty good picture. However, and so, yeah, more is not necessarily better, but I really like that idea of fine tuning, because that's what Chiron feels like to me. When I started reading about it and interpreting it in charts, it was like a shortcut. All of a sudden, somebody's behavior, their vulnerabilities, or where they seemed, well, the word I like to use is overcompensate. You find somebody overcompensating in their life, you almost always are going to see a Chiron thing going on. Look at their Chiron and you're going to see what it is, because we do feel, it's a perceived weakness. It's a perceived wound that we have in our lives. So yeah, sure enough, I love that Chiron. Now, maybe I could look at Saturn. Maybe I could look at a number of connections in somebody's chart and I'm going to see that same issue. But Chiron is probably going to give me a shortcut to to what I consider buried fears or self-doubt, or things that otherwise, truthfully, we could take years of therapy to uncover, or, a bit of time in an astrology chart to identify them. So yeah, there's Chiron. It's a shortcut. And every once in a while, it is so spot on that I'm just like really amazed. But that being said, I also want to encourage you to see that in charts, in my experience, there are trends, there's threads, or there's repeating themes. So if I see something that just doesn't seem to fit with anything else in the chart, I'm going to kind of scoot it over to the side a little bit, because it seems to me the big issues, or the things that are really worth concentrating on, it's almost like that chart is not going to let us get away with not seeing it. It's going, oh, look, it's over here, it's over here, it's over here. So don't be worried that you're going to miss something when you're looking at a chart. Or don't be worried that you say, oh, I don't know anything about Chiron, I must have missed something big. No, it might be something that you can add. But there really are repeating themes in charts almost always. Whether I'm looking at transits or I'm looking at a natal chart, it's rare that I go, oh, here's this piece of information I wouldn't have gotten any other way. But here again, Chiron, it's kind of like a shortcut. It's kind of like the Cliff Notes version sometimes of what's going on for somebody. You might look at it that way too. But that's why, I don't particularly look at some of the others. And, and here again, one of the reasons that it's easier to look at Chiron maybe is because it was discovered in 1977 and identified and named, and it was orbiting between Saturn and Uranus. And by the way, I think it was in Taurus when it was discovered. But immediately astrologers start studying it, accumulating experiences, looking at it in charts, and putting all that data together. So there's more written and studied about Chiron than about many of those others. And here again, if one of those others really captures your attention, go with it. I'm a big believer in that. Follow your curiosity, especially right now with Uranus sitting in Gemini. follow your curiosity. That's an important thing to do. But if they don't, then let it go. And see, my experience even with Chiron was that I started reading about it. I got a couple of books. And quite honestly, it was one of those things where usually when I'm looking at something astrological or even spiritual, I just can't stop. And those books, I was kind of forcing myself to read them. So, I finally decided, okay, either I'm not a Chiron person or I'm just not, this book isn't doing it for me. So that's the other thing to remember. Sometimes you're just not, it's either not the right time or it's just not the right method of learning something. And that's how it was for me in the beginning until I got a book by Martin Lass, Healing Body and Soul, that is about Chiron. And oh my gosh, when I started reading that, once again, it was like the world started opening up. It seems so insightful, so many revelations. Now, I lent my book to somebody. Fortunately, I had outlined part of it because that's kind of what I do when I really like a book. So I still have those notes, but I lent my copy. And then when I went back to try to find a copy, they were really in short supply. Now, I haven't looked recently, but if you can get your hands on Martin Lass, Lass, Healing Body and Soul, I think it's a really good book. It's not very long, but it's got a lot of insights. And by the way, he's kind of an interesting character because he was a professional astrologer, maybe still is, but his main profession was a musician. And he did very, very well as a musician. So when you're trying to find his stuff, it's kind of like, oh, okay, it's not always really forthcoming. And like I said, I haven't checked recently, so it might be out there. So if you're interested in that, go for it. But as we look at Chiron, first let's take some broad strokes about Chiron, what it is, how it acts, etc. It's called the wounded healer, but I also see it referred to as the wounded warrior. Not sure why, but it's just the way it is. Its orbit takes about 49 or 50 years. So here again, wherever it was when you were born, 49 to 50 years later, it's going to come back for its return. That's the cycle that it moves in around the sun. It'll go through all 12 signs in those 50 years. But what's particularly interesting is unlike many of the other planets that spend relatively, equal amounts of time in each of the signs, Chiron doesn't do that. Like I said, it has somewhat of an erratic, unusual elliptical orbit. So it'll spend 8 years in one sign and then as little as 1.5 or 2 years in another sign. So we don't have equal numbers of people with Chiron throughout the zodiac. Now, it's an astronomy thing, so it's well beyond the scope of today's show. But it does have astrological implications, I think. Because, why does it spend all that time in Aries? 8 years. Usually it spends the most amount of time in Aries and the least amount of time in Libra. Now, what I kind of think is because we use astrology as resonating mass consciousness, then, maybe some of the issues, maybe some of the wounds you might think, spiritual wounds, are more related to an Aries concept at this point in time than they are related to Libra. So maybe like 100, 200 years from now, we'd see that Chiron, does have a different kind of path. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, but, and here again, we're not going to talk so much about that today, but I think that could be the argument that, what we're dealing with as a world, what we're dealing with as a society, the wounds have more to do with Aryan issues than they have to do with Libra. But let's leave that. So as we go and aside, like the planets, when you're looking at Chiron, it's very helpful to look at not only the sign that it was in when you were born, but also the house. And I know, you hear Mark Husson talk about this a lot. He talks about it as like, oh, your sun is in the third house. You're an honorary Gemini. Now there again, it's because all these things are related. So let's say that your sun is actually in Scorpio, but Scorpio as a constellation at the time that you were born was located down in the third house. Well, the third house is the natural Gemini house. So when Mark says, or anybody says, you're an honorary Gemini, you're an honorary whatever, what he's saying is, your sun may be in Scorpio, and you're definitely a Scorpio, but it takes on the essence, the flavor. It's like a second skin, a second personality of the house that it's in. So as you're listening today, you may know where Chiron was in your chart when you were born. And hopefully you do. And if you don't, maybe it's something you'll get interested in. But it's not just the sign, it's the house. And so this changes the picture of what we were just talking about too, because we may have many, many fewer people with Chiron in Libra, but there's no reason to think we wouldn't have an equal distribution of people that were born with Chiron in the seventh house, which is the Libra house. So just like with planets, you might want to consider, and when you're looking at Chiron for yourself, is look at the sign that it's in and look at the house that it's in, because the house will tell you a little bit about, what's going on. And I know for me and my Chiron, definitely some things I look at and go, oh yeah, that's the house more so than the actual sign that it's in. So, and sorry about that dog, he likes to bark, and on Tuesdays it seems like there's a lot of activity outside. All right, so after spending 7 years in Aries, this Friday, Chiron is going to move into Taurus. This transit is going to last another 8 years until May of 2034. But just so you know, and here again, I'll be writing about this in my article, but there are going to be a few retrogrades. So for instance, even though Chiron is going into Taurus this week on Friday, September 17th, it's going to be moving retrograde, and it's going to go back into Aries until April of 2027. So we're going to have this last little period. I always think it's kind of a cleanup action when a planet does that. They go back into a sign. So that's going to happen. And then at the end of this very long transit in 2033, Chiron is going to shoot into Gemini, but then it's going to go, oh, wait, I didn't finish Taurus. So then it's going to go back into Taurus. So it's not really going to be out of Taurus until May of 2034, just to give you, here again, broad strokes. All right. So I'm going to look at the chat room really quick. Let's see. Okay, it looks like Serena's making sure that everybody can hear. And somebody's asking, CA, Mercury retrograde, will it affect more on sign than others? Well, let's put it this way. Mercury is going to retrograde in Cancer, just to let you know. And it's going to be, the whole thing is going to be in Cancer. It's not going to go into other signs. But if you're asking about particular people, of course, because there again, where is Cancer in your chart? Somebody who has Cancer in the fourth house of home is going to experience it differently than somebody who's got it in their eighth house, or somebody who's got it over in their 11th house. Like 11th house is friendships. So that Mercury retrograde, the Cancer over there, maybe it's going to affect your relationships a whole lot more than for somebody else. Maybe they've got it in the 10th house. So the 10th house is career. And so you see that, yes, it will affect some people more, especially if you are a Cancer, I would say. And also there again, the aspects, other water signs, will it have more of an effect on them? Possibly. But there again, there's so many different combinations, but yes, there's no way you can say when we're looking at any of this that it's just status quo for every single person. It just doesn't work that way. In fact, sometimes I'm looking at something and I go, wow, I hardly remember that happening. And other things I'm just like, oh my God, and it can seem something minor, and yet I really remember it. Something really significant really happened. So when you're thinking of Chiron, and I want to make sure that we keep coming back to the idea, what is Chiron? Chiron, as the wounded healer, represents where we feel wounded. And at the same time, it represents our healing path simultaneously. So the wound, it's not just about being wounded. And I'm going to introduce here too, I always say perceived. Because what I've found in dealing with other people, and myself maybe, but it's where people feel wounded. And in fact, if you really kind of push it, it's like, well, how does that work? You can give them lots of rational information about how that can't be true, but it doesn't matter. because it's how they feel. It's when we feel wounded, when we feel like we're just not up to snuff, when we feel like there's a deficit in our lives. So, but I think that's an important word, perception, because if we're perceiving it that way, we can change the way we perceive it. But that being said, Martin Lass, one of the things he says about Chiron is that it offers a whole new paradigm of seeing our perceived wounds and gifts, because there is nothing to fix or change or heal or get rid of. And see, think about that. If you see yourself as not deficient or broken or in need of getting fixed, this is just who I am. And maybe I can use this as an asset depending on the situation. Changing our mindset from this is where I'm wounded to this is who I am, and it's neither good or bad, it's just what it is, that can change everything about our lives, right? So that's one reason that book I think really appealed to me, because it wasn't so much about, oh yeah, this person's got this problem and this person has that. It's where we perceive our wounds, but we can perceive those wounds or those vulnerabilities as gifts. So in Greek mythology, Chiron is a centaur. And so here again, this is something that can be a little confusing to people, because they'll go, well, wait a minute, that centaur, half man, half horse, half human, half divine, that's Sagittarius. And it is very similar to Sagittarius, although we're not going to go there today, but that is the mythology that we're talking about. So when you think of the centaur, though, think of the duality there, divine and human. And the centaur was known as being very civilized, bringing culture, being very kind, a great healer, an astrologer, and a teacher. But it was also true that the centaur, Chiron, was considered to be wounded in his mortal parts. And therefore, he wasn't like perfect, but he also couldn't die because he was divine. And so what it does, I think, one of the strongest symbols is our dealing with being spiritual beings living in a physical human body, having a mortal life. And to me, so much really does go back to that, how we balance those two spheres. And I remember I read something just recently when somebody said, what's all this talk about blending spiritual and physical? They're not the same thing. You cannot blend them, but they can exist in a sense side by side. But that's one of the important things that maybe we're dealing with here. We struggle as people on planet Earth, as humans, somehow knowing within us that we're really spiritual creatures. We're divine creatures. So like the centaur, how do we deal with that? And often we can become just like the centaur. We can become the teacher. We can become the student. We can develop all kinds of what I'd say positive qualities, let those coming out, love and kindness and that sort of thing. As we recognize we're not the only person who feels wounded. Everybody feels wounded. Everybody is dealing with that kind of struggle. And it's interesting too, because Chiron, now here again, I don't know where it got its symbol, but if you look for the symbol in your chart, it looks like the letter K, like a capital K, but there's a circle on the bottom of the vertical stroke. So you know what it looks like? It looks like one of those old-fashioned skeleton keys. And that's important because Chiron can be the key. I truly do think as we study it, as we look at it and accept Chiron in our charts, it becomes the key for the healing path, the key for understanding, and the key for the path that we want to be on. So here again, as we're looking at this centaur, we're dealing with spiritual angst. We're dealing sometimes with a sense of loss, not belonging, being deficient in some way. And once again, one of the words I associate with it is overcompensation, because that's what we tend to see. And I'm going to give you a quick example. My Chiron is in Capricorn, which of course is the sign of work. And I could give you many, many, many examples, but this is an easy one, I think. I was in a performance evaluation with my boss, and she asked me, what are your goals for, the next 6 months or year or whatever? And I said, and at the time I was working collaboratively with doctors' committees and research, and I was doing the minutes for their meetings. And so I said, I want to get faster and quicker at turning around those committee minutes so that everybody will have them, right after the meeting. And she kind of looked puzzled, and she looked at me and she goes, well, CA, she said, the last committee meeting, you had the minutes out in 30 minutes. She goes, how much faster do you want to turn those around? And quite honestly, I was kind of speechless, because when I heard her say it like that, I also realized, what exactly are you striving for here? She's right. Most people would, if I had those minutes out in a few days, people would have been happy. And I had them out in 30 minutes. So when I tell her I want to get faster, it's like, exactly what are you thinking of? Where are you going? But I realized that's Capricorn. That is Chiron and Capricorn. Because you know what? Chiron and Capricorn to me says, you're lazy. You're not efficient enough. You got to do it better. You got to do it better. You've got to excel. So even something that by most measures I was doing really well, all I could think was I was inefficient. So I'm just giving you that as an example. But I also want you to know, if she had not said that to me, I don't think it would have ever occurred to me that I was trying to hit a bar that just wasn't even necessary, right? So as we look at this Chiron, we do overcompensate, but it is the opportunity to look at those things that we're carrying around, the lessons, and how many great blessings and rewards we can get by just kind of looking at them. But trying to remember, we don't need to fix anything in ourselves, even though we call it the healing path. It's not about fixing it. It's more in terms, I think, of, once again, understanding what we're good at, understanding what we're not good at. And if we need to become better at something, then we'll do it, or we'll move places, where that quality, that little deficit or that inability to do something doesn't matter quite so much. But ultimately, we're looking for knowledge and healing and experiencing. Those are the things that we want to do. But I also think one of the gifts of Chiron is, as we look at wounds within ourselves, or once again, those vulnerabilities, it helps us develop empathy with others, identifying with and understanding people's pain. And that statement that nobody seems to know who really said it, we're all fighting a hard battle. Chiron helps us start looking at some of that and understand, I'm not the only person who feels wounded. Just getting outside of ourselves a little bit. Now, and by the way, I am hoping, and I'm sure he will, Mark Husson will do a number of things on Chiron, because he is he's a student of Liz Green. And I know that she associates Chiron with sort of the archetype of the Hierophant, the student teacher, the wise one, and about wholeness and just welcoming and embracing what it's like to be a student on the path. So I'm going to let him talk about Liz Green, but please, I hope that you are tuning in to Mark Husson on Mondays. He also has shows sometimes live on Monday evenings and on Wednesdays. You can subscribe to his channel. You can listen to his show for free on YouTube, but you can also subscribe and get some really good extra stuff. And I think it's like $2.99 a month or something. It's almost nothing, but I highly recommend that, because I'm really looking forward to what he's going to talk about with Chiron coming up. So here again, just kind of an aside, the other idea I want to introduce to you, and it's a similar thing, but here again, the more sometimes analogies or symbols or metaphors that we can have, maybe the easier it is to hang on to something. And I've mentioned this before, but if you're familiar with the Japanese art of kintsugi, I don't know if I'm saying it right, but it's where they take broken pottery or ceramics, and they literally use precious metals like gold or silver or platinum, and they mix it in with, however they're fixing this piece of pottery. And what it ends up doing is there's these beautiful lines just that naturally form as they put the pieces back together. And I love the idea of it, because it's about celebrating imperfections instead of hiding them. I mean, think about it. Now the crack in the piece of pottery is gold. And so it's finding beauty in impermanence and imperfection. That's what they say about Kitsugi. So if you don't know about that, look it up. But if you do, that's a good thing to hold on to, I think, for Chiron. Because once again, we can restore ourselves with Chiron. It is about resilience. It's about taking what we consider perceived weaknesses and working very positively with them. Understanding those vulnerabilities, but just going with it. All right. So now I am going to focus specifically on Chiron in Taurus. And here again, I'm giving you mostly stuff that I borrowed from Martin Lass. But it's like pure and simple. If we look at Taurus, remember Taurus is King Minos, who had that bull that Neptune gave him, right? And he was so attached to it, he didn't want to give it back, which created all kinds of problems for him. So think about all the Taurus issues. They're about security. They're about keeping what you've got, surrounding yourself with treasured objects or treasured people. So Chiron's issues in Taurus are about insecurity or a core feeling of unsafety, just being unsafe and possibly undeserving of safety and security and abundance and love, a loss of trust. But more than that, it's a deficit of meaningful values. Here again, Venus rules Taurus, and it's about finding meanings in life, values in life that kind of become your principles for living. And when you have those principles, I mean, obviously, sometimes you need to rework them. You get new information, and maybe you say, that's not the value anymore. Now, this is a silly example, but I'll give it. What if you say, I'm never going to tell a lie? Now, I'm not saying that's a bad value, but somebody comes up to you and says, does this dress make me look fat? Okay, now what are you going to do? Where are you going to use that principle? But if you have other principles, including kindness, or principles that include, I'm not going to say something that isn't necessary to say, then maybe you don't have to classify that as a lie. Now, I know that sounds like situational ethics, but my point is there are different values. There are different guiding principles in life. And sometimes the higher you can go, saying, a guiding principle has to do with empathy. It has to do with kindness. It doesn't mean that you will lie to a person or whatever. I mean, it's hard to apply specifically to behavior, but I think you know what I'm talking about. It probably would not be kind. It probably would not be sympathetic to reinforce somebody's belief in something negative about themselves. Now, if they're asking, how can I improve this? And maybe you kind of gently go there with them. But to reinforce somebody else's insecurity probably isn't kind. It's probably not sympathetic. And maybe it does show a lack of empathy. So my point is that we will struggle. We will go back and forth. And that's what I mean. Just go back and forth with really looking for what are our principles. What are our values? Because that's what Taurus is about. Taurus, and there again, collecting a lot of stuff, having a lot of stuff, trying to make ourselves safe with all these physical things, locks on the door or whatever it is. And I'm not saying any of those are bad, but I'm saying ultimately, if you don't know what your values are, none of those things are going to work effectively. You're always going to feel insecure, or you're always going to feel unsafe or undeserving if you don't work with the underlying values of what's important to you. And of course, Taurus is also about trust. And when there's a broken trust, how do we redevelop trust? And maybe I think ultimately what we want to trust ourselves, and we want to trust the universe. So then it's not about whether or not somebody betrays us or what somebody else does. It's having a trust in the process, trust in ourselves. So as Chiron goes through Taurus, we're going to have this search for security and safety and universal values. But you know what it's going to give us? It's going to give us an understanding to better connect our spiritual and material worlds. It's like we're going to get better at successfully managing those specific components of our physical lives. And I think we are going to find ourselves feeling more secure and trusting that love really always will be there for us because it's inside us. It was never missing. Now, will this be a difficult process, like a hike up a huge mountain? Very possibly. But look at your chart and say, where is Taurus? Because, by the way, where you've got Taurus, you may also have a little bit of Aries. So it's not like it's bang and it just crosses over something. I mean, there again, we can't get into the chart interpretation or the way that works exactly, but just know that wherever 0 Taurus is in your chart is where Chiron is going to be on Friday. And there again, it's right next door to it right now. So look at that, and then we can talk a little bit about the houses and what they mean. But also looking at, I think we can see this as the opportunity that we're going to have very patient progress in this area in the next 8 years. Now in Aries, it was fast, it was fire. And I think there was a lot of provocative stuff with Chiron in Aries. Now we're going to go for a more patient, a more deliberate pace in dealing with our vulnerabilities. And some of the things, I think we're going to work on self-awareness, building and maintaining self-worth. And is there anything really better than that? Because boy, that's the basis so much of relationships and everything else. We're going to be creating more straightforward and rewarding relationships. But when I say relationships, I'm talking with a number of things, with our finances, with our money, how we earn it, how we save it or spend it or treat it, a relationship with our resources and our possessions, and really thinking about what do we appreciate and find valuable? How do we treat our stuff? Because ultimately, Taurus is very much about our stuff, what we collect and accumulate and why. It's about pleasure and comfort and indulgences. And man, oh man, it's a lot about food. Now, even though Cancer is also a lot about food, and Virgo too, but Taurus, it's about how are we feeding ourselves? How are we growing our food or getting our food and producing our food? How much do we eat? How little? Like, for instance, do we overcompensate by really trying to deny ourselves pleasure and comfort and indulgences? Or maybe we go overboard the other way. So Taurus is very much about consumption. Because once again, King Minos, he got that bull and he wasn't going to give it back. So this is very much about stuff in our lives and consumption. It's about our bodies and how we view our bodies, how we care for them, how we think of our bodies. Is your physical body your enemy? It's like, what's it going to do next? So we'll have the opportunity with Chiron and Taurus to look at some of these things in a deeper way, right? So there could be things that come up with health and disease on the planet in general. It'll be interesting to see where that goes with our environment and, of course, our personal creativity, our skills and aptitudes and talents and abilities, because Venus rules Taurus. So there again, how we're creative, how we want to be creative, original people in the universe. That's going to come into it too. Learning how to give and receive with no strings attached. Coming into really a much, much better understanding of safety and security. But remember, Chiron in Taurus is really going to invite us to look at our values and our priorities. So we may find at the end of this period, the stuff in our lives has a completely different meaning. Maybe we've got more stuff, maybe we have less stuff, but it's going to be very different. Now, I do want to go through some of those houses, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. But just quickly, a few of the people that just jumped out at me that have Chiron and Taurus are obviously very wealthy, known names, like Conrad Nicky Hilton Jr., hotel magnate. He has or was born with Chiron and Taurus. Rupert Murdoch was, so was Ross Perot. It's just like those people just jump out at you because of their money. And Marilyn Monroe was born with Chiron in Taurus, and so was Barbara Walters. Now, we're not going to do those people specifically today because I want to go and talk about some houses, and I'm going to get another handout. I'm looking really quickly just at our chat room to see. Okay, so, Judith is saying Chiron in Cancer here, hoping to move to Taurus lightens the transiting square going on for a while in Aries. Well, it will, Judith, because you're right. Now it's going to be a sextile between those two things. And so you are probably going to feel a whole lot better. So let me get the handout that I have on Chiron. And I'm going to try to do this really quickly. We at some point may do this slower or go into more depth with this. This is a handout that I developed for a class years ago. So I'm just going to kind of touch base. But here again, if you have got, and I am borrowing heavily from Martin Lass here. A lot of these are his words. I don't want you to think I made this up or that I came up with it by myself. So if you have Chiron going through the first house, and I will also remind you, as you're listening, if you know where Chiron is in your chart, then listen up to that particular house. But also, and I don't want to complicate it or confuse it, but if you've got Chiron in Aries or the first house, these things tend to be equally true. So if now Chiron is either, natally in that first house, or if it is in Aries, or if it is in, as you've got Taurus in that first house, that's what we're talking about here. So I know that can be complicated. And mostly I'm talking about really transiting Chiron. But like I said, if you know enough about your chart or about where Chiron is, maybe you'll hear a little gem that you can go back to. And you can always come back and listen to this later. Okay, so first house issues, what are they? They're about a profound lack or loss of self-worth, undeserving of life, and self-denial. It's Aries stuff. It's about identity, self-identity. And the gift is really discovering and embracing how unique we are and our ability to really stand firmly and gently in our own space, despite the opinions of other people. So it's like the Aries warrior there. That's, Chiron is in Taurus, but it's in the first house. So, and in the second house, it pretty much mimics exactly what I've been talking about Chiron in Taurus in general. It's about being insecure and feeling unsafe, or feeling like you really want to work on your values because you just don't have those down pat, or they're not working for you. So that's what you're going to do. You're going to launch into this process of really looking at security and safety and universal values. And you're going to learn that connection. You're going to get much, much better about managing those physical components of your life. Gemini rules the third house. So if that Chiron in Taurus is in your third house, it has Gemini qualities. So this is feeling unable to communicate with others. So once again, think about it, and I've seen this in people when they have Chiron in the third house, they feel like what they say is never good enough. They're verbally inept, or they have a hard time fitting in socially, or more than that, they think they're not smart. And you know what? It has nothing to do with it. These are perceived, remember? So you're going to work on an awareness of that. And you're going to really figure out how you have this intuitive intelligence and how you can share your ideas in ways that are going to be very practical and successful for you. Then fourth house, this is naturally the Cancer house. So this is core beliefs and feelings about love, about belonging to a group. And you might have issues, or what you might find coming up for you is believing the world just isn't safe, the world isn't supportive, family isn't a good thing, or your friends aren't there for you, a core belief that you're unlovable or that you've been abandoned. So there again, what are you going to do? You're going to go right down to those roots. You're going to look to the source of love and find that it's within. So the gift is you're going to, kind of turn all those things around. And just realize, for one thing, how silly is it to ever think you're not lovable? How silly is it to let your opinion of yourself be based on family or on a group of people? You're going to learn to be nurturing and loving in ways that you never knew possible. All right, if Chiron is moving through the fifth house, that's naturally the Leo house. So once again, this has to do with self-expression. Because remember, Leo says, I'm the performer, I'm the leader, everybody follow me. So if Chiron is sitting in the fifth house, you might be really reticent to, to put yourself out there, to play or to feel like you deserve self-expression. You don't deserve to be the person up on the stage. So you're going to explore those things. You're going to explore spontaneity too, because that's what you might do is you might just pull back and never do anything spontaneous because Leo really doesn't like to be humiliated or embarrassed, right? So if those are some issues that come up for you, this is about realizing, that once again, it's a perception. It's not real. So you know what that's going to do for you? It's going to give you permission to shine. All right, Virgo, if it's in the sixth house for you, this is very much about feeling incomplete and fragmented and scattered and disconnected or impure. Because see, Virgo, remember, it tends to be perfectionist. And so it wants to be pure. It wants to know that life has order or that there's ways that things all fit together. So you're going to be looking for wholeness and integrity and purity. You're wanting to get things right. So, and you will. You'll come into more gratitude in your life. You'll come into the ability to integrate masses of information in your life in a better way. Now, I know I'm really clipping this really short, but the seventh is Libra. So this is about nobody's ever going to love me. I'm never going to get married, or I'm never going to have this soulmate. I'm never going to have balance in my life. Not true. Those are the things that you're going to work on. But those are the things you're going to figure out. And you're going to think about how you are already complete and perfect without what you see as this external person giving you that kind of credibility and discovering more harmony and peace in your life. Scorpio, that's the eighth house. So this is a core feeling of being disconnected from spirit. God forgot me. He left me alone. Lord knows what happened here. So it's a deep-seated fear of loss or maybe of death, of illness. And so this is kind of rediscovering your immortality, of loss, rediscovering your connection to spirit. And so you might be that person who's meditating or doing a whole, getting very much into the spiritual side of things and just looking. I mean, maybe you're studying astrology. Maybe you're picking up any number of other spiritual things because you want to check that out. All right, ninth house, feeling of meaninglessness. The universe doesn't mean anything. There's no reason I'm here. What's the point? It's a loss of that kind of feeling of inspiration and like there really is meaning in the universe. So that's what you're going to be looking for. You're going to try to, tap into that. And what are you going to find, of course? That the divinity resides within you, that you are giving life meaning. All right, Capricorn is feeling unrecognized. This is all about work in the 10th house, that you're saying, you know what, there's no organization in life. There's no structure. Everything's just chaotic. I can never have the career that I want. I can never use my talents. And so then you're going to work on that order and control. You're going to figure out how to be that master and how to find inner peace by ordering your own consciousness. 11th house is Aquarius. Oh my gosh, I could tell you stories about these. I feel like I draw these people. The Aquarius Chiron, feeling like an alien or an outsider. Where are my people? I'm abandoned. I'm one of a kind. There's nobody on the planet like me. But what you learn is connection and how to contact, or not only contact, but literally connect with other people. Being objective and also seeing that being alone isn't the same thing as being lonely, being able to communicate. Then Pisces is the 12th house. Now, this is the ultimate one. And by the way, I feel like there's lots of people out there with Chiron and Pisces. And they're the ones who feel ultimately betrayed and victimized by God. There is no God. He's not looking out after me. No spiritual path ever works for me. God just abandoned me. So this is believing that there really is oneness, that there really is a divine spark, not only in yourself, but in other people that you can connect to. So that there is a oneness and a wholeness in life. So I know I've gone way over, and so I got to get off the air, but I hope that gives you an idea. And here again, if you know what the meaning of the houses are, go look that up and figure out if Chiron is in Taurus in that house for you during the next 8 years. Those are the issues you're going to be working on. And once again, it can be a wonderful, fun path. Chiron is your key to healing. And healing in a way like the Japanese, ceramic, gold, etc., kitsugi. You are going to shine. You're going to be beautiful because of the way you restore yourself with Chiron in Taurus. Okay, so let's wrap this up. Thank you very, very much for being here today, for joining me over on YouTube and in the chat room. I really appreciate it. And I'll go back and look at all your comments because I'm sure I missed some. But thanks to Serena, our producer today. I hope that you'll stay tuned because Kelly Whetstone is up next. And her show is Empowerment with Kelly Whetstone. Here's your quote of the week. Helen Keller. She had Sun in Cancer and Chiron in Taurus. She says, many persons have a wrong idea of what constitutes true happiness. It is not attained through self-gratification, but through fidelity to a worthy purpose. It's those last words that I'm emphasizing because, once again, Taurus wants to have principles to live by. Remember that. This is CA signing out. You can find me for personal sessions on one2listen.com. We can look at your Chiron. Please feel free to request a scheduled call at a time that's good for you. You have been listening to Everyday Astrology with C.A. Brooks on YouTube, where we are changing the way that you think about and process Chiron.